the one where not Henny Youngman, Rodney Dangerfield goes back to school, to college, and he doesn't really attend classes. He just leaves a tape recorder sitting there on the desk. You know, the guy's lecturing and all the students sitting there, but there's a tape recorder on Rodney Dangerfield's desk. And then the next time you see the class, there's like 5 tape recorders all sitting on desks. And then later on you see the lecturer lecturing, and there's a tape recorder on every desk.
Yeah.
And then the very last time you see it, it pans back and you see tape recorders on every desk, and when you get up to the front, you see a tape recorder playing.
I remember that.
So, but strictly speaking, this is not an in-between course. What do they call it? A hybrid course.
Yeah.
But as you can tell, I'm trying to get close to that, because I know people signed up for the course thinking, oh good, I don't have to come to every one, because Friday night, who the heck, a lot of people are away working and stuff, so
Yeah.
so that's kind of diluted. But at the same time, it's kind of hard to talk to myself,
Yeah.
so I'm pretty glad that at least some of you are still here. And this is kind of tough, because I already know this stuff. And so it doesn't surprise me when I point it out, but I think it can surprise folks. Because when we're talking about Aristotle and the soul, keep in mind that up to this point, the concept of psyche, the soul in Greek, and anima in Latin. So hence, animals, if you move, you know, if it's a moving, living thing, plants are not animals. That's kind of interesting. But of course, any animals that do move, the motion is essentially an important aspect of that, and that's why they're animated, right? But when we're talking about the concept of psyche with Plato, remember psyche is that, you know, it has no parts. It's not a physical thing. It's a spiritual thing. I mean, it's an abstraction, which is why the soul is capable of being one with the other ideas, which are all abstractions. So Plato's making this connection that our soul, which you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or whatever, and is the most important part of us, is not part of the body. Well, remember in the metaphysics and the categories, Aristotle argues that if something doesn't have physical substance, then it doesn't exist. That's wrong to think that there are abstract entities like triangularity. Now, just because he says that, by the way, doesn't mean that that problem has gone away. As a matter of fact, it hasn't. We're still very confused about whether things like numbers exist, whether abstractions exist. The problem will eventually be referred to as universals. So the concepts that are what we would call today collective nouns, right? You know, we have, you know, there's a horse, there's a field of horses. Horses, by the way, are, right? You know, okay, so am I referring to something by referring to the concept of horses, a set of things, the categories? Obviously, Aristotle thinks of those as a word, and that's all, right? So it's a word that you associate with the kinds of physical things that have substance and that have all the characteristics of horse, and not with things that are a cup or a cow or a goat, etc., right? So for Aristotle to exist, it has to have physical substance. It has to be something you can touch, and see and hear and stuff of that sort, right? Interesting, I don't remember him talking about air. I mean, he definitely thinks that everything consists of earth, air, fire, water that's here. So he accepts that. So Empedocles is essentially his model for what exists in the smallest parts, earth, air, fire, water. He does add a fifth essence, which he refers to as a quintessence in Latin. He doesn't, but we do, right? The fifth essence. And the quintessence is referred to usually as ether. And what is it? It's not here on this earth. It's up in the sky, and it's what essentially is holding up the stars, or the yes.
Didn't he believe in dreams though? Like, how did he reconcile those with?
Yeah. You really do have dreams. Those are in your mind. And
So
I would
he
think
thought
he
they
would
were
take
like
them
us.
as a very physical, just as our thoughts are also in our minds. So for him, the soul is a physical thing. And the question then becomes, well, where is it? What does it look like? You know, what's it made of, etc. I mean, that's the difficulty in answering that for Plato is why he thought it was invisible. It's just kind of spiritually attached to the body, and it's not really a physical thing. And as I mentioned just before you came in, that problem doesn't go away. In fact, it's still very much a problem today. It's kind of interesting how it's kind of what's the wonderful word that Calvin uses in Calvin and Hobbes? It's not migrated. What's he calls it? There's a weird word that he uses. It's actually a real word, but I can't think of it right now. But it's funny that transmigrated or whatever. But we still have that problem, and the one I think that's interesting to me is Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. I think I mentioned them when we were talking about the soul with Plato, because that's like the contemporary way that continues on as an issue. It's not exactly what Plato would be thinking about, because in a sense it includes all of our conscious moments for our entire life, and that they're somehow connected so that I can go back in time and think of how I felt at such and such a moment. And theoretically, I'm using quantum tunneling to actually experience that moment again. So my mind is, in some sense, entangled with itself in the way that quantum mechanics tells us that particles can be, and must be, actually. For like the sun to burn the way it does, that's explained as a quantum tunneling event that's constantly going on, that is the only way that amount of consumption of fuel can be explained in that kind of situation. So, I mean, did you ever wonder what keeps the sun burning? Doesn't ever run out, How can it be burning for like billions of years, or however long they think each of these different suns last and stuff. Quantum tunneling, and that's because it basically enables nuclear events to occur. So it's the nuclear fuels that are exploding, the hydrogen there. But so everything actually has this quantum tunneling capability, so everything is connected through time and space. If you're a physicist, it doesn't really communicate very well into everyday practical things, because if my wife says to me, I told you yesterday to make sure you brought back a couple of bottles of whatever, and I forgot. I can't suddenly go, okay, I'll get them. and go back into time. There they are. Oh no, we don't have that kind of capability yet.
Wouldn't that be nice?
That would be. Well, it's going to be really confusing though.
Yeah.
The accident that happened today down on 5th Street, I imagine, the people that, were in the accident could say, wait a minute, hold on, go back, and then avoid one another. That would be useful. But then I can imagine, well, what about the Olympics, where each person is like trying to, wait a minute, I know what I did wrong here, let's fix that, and before you know it, they never end, because everybody is trying to win. That could be interesting. But so, when the soul exists in that kind of sense, it's not really something you can see right here and now, and it makes me wonder, how would that kind of tie in with the idea that the soul is eternal? I mean, strictly speaking, physicists would say, yes, your soul is eternal, because this moment's eternal. This moment has always been here in this particular time and space. Oh, it just went by. But it's actually still there. It's been waiting for us. We kind of reached it, passed through it, and yet it's still there. So what gives me the impression of time elapsing is my own consciousness, which is proceeding in a certain arrow, as they use a direction. Right? Interesting. Right? But Aristotle argues, no, everything has to have substance. It has to exist at the moment, right now. Right? It has to have tense, but if it's existing now, it has to have substance now. And so the question then becomes, well, what about the soul? Obviously, is the knowledge of the soul admittedly contributes greatly to the advance of truth in general, and above all to our understanding of nature, for the soul is in some sense the principle of animal life. And if you think, well, how was that written in Greek? Because animal means animated, and so he's in some sense saying anima, animal life, right? So anima is part of the word of animal. So soul is like the basis for being a souled creature, right? Okay, so that's really very important. So our aim is to grasp and understand first its essential nature, and secondly its properties. How does it have effects, right? I know we don't use this word. Remember this, because these are on the web. These are relatively old translations, so the English is not the same as what we use today. We don't usually talk about affections the way he's doing here, but he's talking about how something has effects, right? So it's not like we're all taught to love, have affection for one another. No, that's something else, right? But what kind of effects does it have proper to the soul itself, while others are considered to attach to the animal owing to the presence within it of soul? So an animal moves because it has soul. So, and by the way, Thomas Aquinas, who we'll see later on in the course, is the Roman Catholic theologian that merges Aristotle with Augustinian dogma, which Augustinian dogma is based on Plato. So roughly around 1300 AD is when the church incorporates this with that, and you end up with believe it or not, I know, 1300, you think, that's a few years ago, yet that's still the official dogma of the Roman Catholic Church. With some additions, of course. They finally pardoned Galileo in, I think it was like 1950, or was it even more recent? I forget. But yeah, Galileo's okay now as far as the church is concerned. They've kind of gotten used to I know, it's not really that funny. However, so they just take a long time to incorporate stuff. But the incorporation of this is going to be significant, because if I'm thinking of the animal as having a soul, say a dog, okay, pick a dog. A lot of people worry, do dogs have a soul, and when my dog dies, will I see my dog in heaven? It's a real question. Lots of people worry about that. Guess what? Descartes, famously, around 1600, thought, no, only humans have souls. That's not part of the church. It's not part of official, dogma of any sort. But nonetheless, because he said that, awful lot of people believed it, and that's why I think there's an awful lot of people that feel like the church somehow, or Christianity in general, feels like only humans have souls and animals do not. As far as I know, that's never been a real issue in the real church thinking. Does that make sense? But in some sense, it got into the people's minds that animals don't have souls, so whatever kind of afterlife there is, they're not part of it. By the way, that would still work in modern physics, because everything is at a non-local level interconnected, right? I know that's an odd word, but if you have the concept of non-locality, in other words, things interact with other things throughout time and space, regardless of their being locally or proximate to they don't actually have to touch, because they're actually touching throughout time and space through quantum tunneling, which is not something that you are overtly aware of because of the way our senses are geared towards here and now. As far as who knows, we might each have all kinds of intuitions about non-local interconnections. I'm still puzzled over, the kind of coincidence, that we have with people we love, how we know what they're thinking, even though they're far away, or the dogs that know when you're leaving and you're coming home, right? There are all kinds of examples of things that seem unexplainable, right? And we're like, oh, okay, well, maybe that's because we don't have the explanation yet, and not because they happen. We just don't know why, right? Well, we're just learning about our quantum non-locality and things of that sort. And if it happens on the sun, and they're already making quantum computers, which is like, whoa, don't worry, we're not going to be buying them anytime soon. But it's scary, because a quantum computer, from what I understand, can do the calculations to figure out your password instantaneously, regardless of how complex your password is. So once they start selling those to, hackers, we're doomed.
Or some other foreign government chooses to build them.
I don't know why we're just complaining about the Russians, because I'm sure Japan is trying to do this. I mean, China, Korea, you name it. Every country is out there with people that have the ability to go on Facebook. And if you're on Facebook, Facebook says you can promote your page by just paying us more money. And all you have to do is say, oh, okay. And Facebook doesn't say, what is it that you're promoting? We have to check and see if it's legal. No, they don't ask that. You want to say crazy things about, your neighbor? Feel free, Just pay us more money, and they'll be fine with that. You want to say nasty things about Hillary Clinton? Sure, you could boost this if you just give us another $100,
Yeah.
Why not? Nobody does fact checking or anything, to see if any of that stuff is true. And there's nuance in delivery. You know, how the Russian news, you know, presents things, you know. As usual, the Americans, FBI completely ignored all the signs of this guy, you know, that was threatening to kill children in the school. You know, he had dress rehearsals. No, he didn't. What do you think? By the way, what do you think? Are those FBI agents and the sheriff in the office that received those calls? You heard about this stuff?
Mhm.
That's pretty. That sounds.
Actually, it was on CNN earlier,
Yeah.
downstairs.
Plus the sheriff that was at the school with a gun, and basically.
They say there's 4 of them now. Who
4?
didn't do a thing.
How would you live with yourself if you were in that situation? You'd be scared to death. But I mean, I would run into the building and immediately pee my pants. But I would probably have already been in the building by the time I realized this is probably my last thing to do, is run into a building and get shot. But
Well, if you have a gun, you have an advantage. You can shoot back.
oh, yeah. But you know, the kind of gun that you carry in those kinds of situations, about, you know, like, and he's got
Yeah. Well,
an AR-15. Unless you,
Doesn't matter.
unless you.
Not in close
A
quarters, it
22
doesn't
will
matter.
put you down.
Oh, that's true. That's true. It's just if he's got a magazine that's got 30 rounds in it, and I've got 5 or 6.
But in theory, he's not
But
trained.
He's
They
an
were.
18-year-old kid, and that cop was eligible for retirement, so that tells me he's trained and seasoned.
Yeah.
he should know how to sneak up on people
Mhm.
without drawing attention to himself,
Well, so
and then taking out.
his soul. Bring this easily back. I mean, if you think about it, what Aristotle's asking in that particular. Oh, I went off page here. How do you make, you know, because we don't think of my knee moving this way as it is moving, but we don't think of that as my soul or other physical motions, right? But what I do think of as my soul, as what, of course, today we would think of as our consciousness, right? What I'm thinking. And that's what motivates me. So if I didn't run into the building at that point, I can't blame it on my knee. My knee told me not to go. No, that's not even part of our vocabulary. So the knee is not part of the soul, but it's part of my animality, my body, right? So there are, I realize that might be a kind of dumb example, but there's all sorts of things that my body does. Farts, right? Sorry about that. But I did have a big bowl of lentil soup this evening. But but there's all sorts of things that the body does that we don't think of as soul. And yet you can imagine the way a person dances, the way they skate, the way some of these Olympians have been performing is just incredible. I can't imagine having your body do some of those things. At least my body wouldn't do any of those things. I have the kind of body where you go down a set of slippery steps and you do a triple axel. You know, it's not going to land very well. You know? Sorry. But so the soul is the activity of the body. So that's his main explanation. So what makes me an animal? A living animal. Obviously, once it's a dead animal. Now here's the really scary part. For Plato, when the animal part has died, the soul is released somehow and can go back basically to heaven. Which, by the way, if you think in the Christian context, explains how, of course, once you die, you go to heaven, right? But with Aristotle, when the body ceases moving, the soul is no longer present. That doesn't mean it goes on somewhere else. It's the end of the soul. The end of the activity of the body is the end of soul, right? So there's no afterlife for Aristotle, unless you get the body moving again, which is why, once you get to Aquinas, the resurrection of the body is an important part of the Christian dogmatic beliefs, right? Because in that case, now your soul, you're in the grave. So the soul is not any place, not in heaven, not in hell, not in purgatory, right? Sorry, that's what my granny always used to call purgatory, is purgatory. Did I say that last week or whatever? That's just so hilarious. A turkey, because you've obviously been a turkey, so you deserve to be punished. So it's purgatory. My granny said that in her 90s, with only one tooth, which she used in order to eat bologna. What a memory, right? I'm hoping for better when I'm in my 90s than just one tooth. That depends on all sorts of things. But so, for Aquinas, the resurrection of the body is not just St. Paul dreaming about what might eventually happen. That becomes actually an absolute necessity if there's going to be an afterlife, and it has to be in a physical place, because the body, of course, is a physical body. So, if we're accepting Aristotle, things have to have substance. So that's kind of interesting, right? So you can imagine that's why that's going to be a pretty significant thing. So how do we get to heaven, I suppose? Aristotle doesn't say that. So that's a Christian thing. And the reason that it will remain a Christian thing, of course, is because they've accepted Plato beforehand, and they're just going to be too depressed if there's no heaven, as you can imagine. Right? So, the Summa Genera, soul lives. What is it? A substance of, right? And I've already given it away. It's the activity of the body. The big book, probably Aristotle's most important in our contemporary sense, is his Nicomachean Ethics. There were actually 2 ethics books that he wrote. The one is just called the Ethics. The other one is the Nicomachean Ethics. I used to love asking as a quiz question, who was Nicomachus? But I won't use that one tonight. But Nicomachus was 2 different individuals, which is why it's a trick question. His father, Aristotle's father, was Nicomachus. I should look. Machus is obviously power. I don't know what Nico means. That's interesting. I should have looked it up. Sorry. But his son was also named Nicomachus. So you've got 2 individuals named Nicomachus that it could be. So was it in honor of his father that he named it the Nicomachean Ethics, or was it named in honor of his son, or was it a book that the son as an adult promoted, especially, we have no idea, but somehow the one is referred to as Nicomachean. But here, if we're talking ethics, we're talking about the good life. Ethika means character in Greek. Ethika is character. So the question of ethics is, how can you have a good character? How can you be a good person? And you have to be a good person in order to lead a good life. Evil people might enjoy themselves, but they're not leading a good life. They're absolutely wrong in thinking that what they're experiencing is a good life. They're corrupt, etc. Right? So what they're doing is wrong, and what they're enjoying is wrong. They should not be enjoying it. They would actually be happier if they were a good person and doing only good things. They don't realize it. So ethika, how to be a good person. When we think in terms of Plato, of course, the explanation that Plato gives us through Socrates, right, is that you're already a good person. Someone else is kind of a mediocre person, and someone else is even more mediocre, right? What makes us evil is our bodies and the attachment we have to physical things. Remember how Plato kind of sets this schema up, that the less body you have, the less attachment to the body you have, the closer you are to being good, because it's an entirely spiritual affair. It has nothing to do with happiness in a physical sense. It's something I brought 2 new books with me this evening. This one is Steven Pinker, Enlightenment Now, and I haven't gotten far enough into it. I'm only here, if you can see, right there. So I don't know yet, because I haven't gotten far enough to see the explanation of why he's titled it Enlightenment Now. But when I see the title, I'm thinking of Frank Costanza from Seinfeld, where he goes, "Serenity now." No, not familiar with it. Okay, to me that's, my daughter thought, well, wait a minute, what about Apocalypse Now? Right, which that could be even a better explanation. Apocalypse Now was a movie. It was kind of a critique of Vietnam. Well, would you even call that a critique? It was an absolute slam dunk. Slam dunk. But, and actually, as far as I recall, did I write it down? Okay. I actually underlined it, so I'm prepared to read this. But I'll show you where this is from, if you like. Actually, even if you don't like. By the way, Steven Pinker's a Harvard psychologist. If you don't mind my saying so, he's also an Ashkenazi, genetically. And his wife, Rebecca Goldstein, is also Ashkenazi. I don't know if that thrills you or not, but Ashkenazi. Are you familiar with the Ashkenazi?
No.
Yeah. They are genetically very, very inbred. They were Jewish. There are 2, the Ashkenazi and the Sephardic Jews, but they've like only married within, so their gene pool is like identifiably relatively unique, right? You can like identify them as like that group, and their average IQs are like out of the range of everybody else practically. So you could like go down the list, historical list of the significant geniuses, genie, I don't know how you pronounce the plural of more than one genius. And it's like Ashkenaz, there's just like a whole bunch of them are all. So that's just interesting. I'm not prejudiced, I'm jealous, but it's one of those silly things. Okay, so around 500 BC, which he uses BCE because he's being politically correct, right? You know the difference? BC means before Christ,
Before current era.
right?
BC.
And BCE is before the common era. It's like, oh, so you're not being affected by Christianity, are you? It just happens to start at exactly the same year, which, by the way, was dumb because they have no year 0. So if you know how to count, and obviously people in the church did not, right? And you end year 1 BC, and then you start year 1 AD. That first year has to be year 0, and then you have 1, and then 2, right? And they totally skipped year 0. So that's just really, if you're a mathematician, it hurts your head to think how screwed up that was. Okay, but so around 500 BCE, in what the philosopher Karl Jaspers called the axial age. Have you ever heard of that? It's pretty much, a lot of people refer to it as that, the axial age. Actually get, no. There we go. So the axial age, several widely separated cultures, I think I briefly mentioned this, right? Pivoted from systems of ritual and sacrifice that merely warded off misfortune to systems of philosophical and religious belief that promoted selflessness and promised spiritual transcendence. Taoism and Confucianism in China, Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism in India, Zoroastrianism in Persia, Second Temple Judaism in Judea, and classical Greek philosophy and drama emerged within a few centuries of one another. Confucius, Buddha, Pythagoras, Aeschylus, and the last of the Hebrew prophets walked the earth at the same time. So that's the axial age, right? Recently, an interdisciplinary team of scholars identified a common cause, and this is what I think. If I had mentioned it, I should have, that it was unique. At about the same time, all of the civilizations got large enough that there was a social class of people that were able to then start thinking and became critical of the authorities, the priesthood class that had been running things before that, right? Well, here's an interesting explanation. I never heard this before. Recently, an interdisciplinary team of scholars identified a common cause. It was not an aura of spirituality that descended on the planet, but something more prosaic: energy capture. The axial age was when agricultural and economic advances provided a burst of energy, upwards of 20,000 calories per person per day in food, fodder, fuel, and raw materials. This surge allowed the civilizations to afford larger cities, a scholarly and priestly class, and a reorientation of their priorities from short-term survival to long-term harmony. So that, I thought, when I read that, I was like, yes! Kind of, because I've been repeating that. So obviously I'm not just talking on my own. There are reasons why I've learned some of this stuff, and I'm just passing it on, right? So that's kind of cool.
When people had time to do stuff other than worry about survival.
Yeah, they got to go to parties, drink wine, and argue with one another.
Yeah.
You know, which we still can do, except now we use Doritos, beer, and football games.
Yeah.
Which just goes to show what we should do is have everybody come over to the house, eat Doritos, drink beer, and not watch a football game. And just yell at one another. Wouldn't that be great? You know, that would be. And we would be discussing justice. What do you think justice is? Turning on the football game before I bash your face in. You know, that's probably what they would discuss. They didn't have football games. Well, I mean, they didn't have TV anyway, so. At least not flat screens.
Their TV was more 3D.
That's true. That's true.
Much larger.
How did I get there? That seemed like such a non sequitur, but do you use that expression? Yes? Means it doesn't follow. It didn't follow at all. It was like squirrel, right? That's what that is. Okay. So you're looking at Plato's conception of the good being very abstract, and individuals are either completely good somehow or naturally good. Remember, your character is kind of innate, right? So if we think that certain individuals have an innate good character and other not. That's a very Platonic kind of conception. Aristotle, everything has to do with substance. But number one, the concept of good itself. Remember, he's going to analyze every nitpicky thing about the way the word works, right? And I remember when I was in college, my one philosophy of language class, the whole class, our text was on the nature of the word good, and we spent the whole time collecting how the word good was used in everyday conversation. So that was like what a waste of time. It wasn't a very good class. No, but good was the concept. Well, of course, more happened out of it. Dr. Crotty gave the class. The whole point was we were experimenting on learning the nature of meaning, right? How words can mean so many different things. I remember in Virginia, we went, I had a class of people there. We went to Stanton, Virginia, if you've ever been there, and the Shakespeare Theater that's there. Is it Virginia or North Carolina? No, it was Virginia. It was Virginia. Yeah. When I was in North Carolina, it was a totally separate trip. So, yeah, Stanton, Virginia. One of the places we visited was the birthplace of Woodrow Wilson, for example. The only president we've ever had, I think, that had a PhD, because Obama didn't have a PhD, right? He has his Juris Doctor. It's not a PhD, it's a Juris Doctor, right? Oh, no, Carter had a PhD in nuclear science, I think, right? Do you remember? Nobody remembers. We don't. We don't. Oh, okay. But so we went to the theater, and they gave us a special lesson on reading Shakespeare. So if you're an actor and you're doing your lines, right? They gave each of us a line on a little slip of paper, and they had each of us read the line, and they told us what the message was that we were supposed to give with that line. And we did, and it was kind of impressive. Oh, yeah, so you could read that in such a way that you're meaning this. Then they turned around and said, okay, now read your lines, but mean this. They gave us a totally different message to communicate. And so we all did it and realized that we, with our intonation and everything, we could actually do that. Give a totally different meaning to what we said. And that was kind of impressive. Wow, you can mean two different things with the same line. And then they did it again. And they gave us a different message. And we were like, whoa, there's no way you could get 3 messages out of one line? Well, but no, we had actually no trouble whatsoever in communicating a totally different third message. And then a fourth, and a fifth. And you know what? By the time you're eventually getting to like the 10th thing, you realize, whoa, language is scary. We can do practically anything we want with a particular line. But then, of course, the problem comes, how can anyone interpret Shakespeare? What the heck is going to happen here if everyone's got no, unified understanding of what's, the point of this play? And that's, of course, when they present the director, who is the person who gives it that direction, right? The director. And so he's the one, or she's the one, or it's the one, if we have an undetermined sort of individual, right? That is going to basically decide what the play is meaning in this particular rendition of it, etc. So that was kind of impressive as well. But you can have the same problem with words. Where do you find out what a word means? How do you find out what a word means?
Dictionary.
Dictionary. So
Let's be honest, Google.
Google Dictionary.
right.
You still own a dictionary.
Yeah.
I do.
You still have a dictionary or an encyclopedia.
Yeah.
I happen to know, which might even be a better way, except that it takes you the whole day to finish reading the one, depending on the word, right?
Yeah.
How did the dictionary get its list of meanings for the word?
Someone made that decision.
A bunch of old guys wearing jackets with patches on their sleeves and pipes walk around with like pads of paper and knock on doors and ask people, so what do you mean by anti-disestablishmentarianism? Nothing, so, right? No, how else? How else do they do it? Of course, it's just old, mostly guys, maybe some women, I don't know, sitting around, probably smoking pipes, with dim lamps, writing down, maybe using sources. Maybe they go to a thing like this. I don't know, have you ever used this? So last night, Dawn and I she's reading Charles Dickens right now. She finished with the Bronte sisters, and now she's on Charles Dickens. And it's like Bleak House she's reading. Imagine, it sounds horrible, I couldn't imagine reading Bleak House, but she wants to read every novel he ever wrote, so she's now on Bleak House. She finished Tale of Two Cities. But she's reading, and as she's reading, she's got this little dictionary which has to sit on its own table. It's because it's a little one. And so whenever she hits a word, because Charles Dickens lived years ago, a lot of the words he used, by the way, I think he's inventing words like Shakespeare did. It's like, whoa, what on earth is this word? So the word we looked up was growler. I can't see. And in fact, actually it was growlery. That's it. That's the one. So she used the word growlery. So I wouldn't bring up this particular question except here in this growlery, which is Bleak House, actually. I was like, just trying to figure out what is growlery, right? And it turns out to be the place where you can grumble. The place where you can grumble. So they're in Bleak House and they can grumble in Bleak House. So, you know, and you think, is Charles Dickens inventing this? You know, look at this number here. That looks like, wow, a lot of people used it around, hey, that's about when Bleak House was written. We're all trying, do you know what growlery means? You know, they were, you know, all probably wondering, you know. But actually, how do you interpret this? So at this line here, that's absolutely zilch, right? But then up here, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? You get, that's a really low number. So hardly any books at all were using growlery at the time. But if I put in feminine, now notice growlery hardly gets anything whatsoever. Hardly anybody's using it. By the way, these are all the books that Google has on record from 1800 and 2000. Yes?
No, it's
No?
not descriptive.
So, but feminism, notice, right around here, which, by the way, is why Wollstonecraft, Mary Wollstonecraft, was considered a proto-feminist, because they didn't have the word feminist yet. So she's a proto-feminist. Mary Wollstonecraft's daughter was Mary Shelley. She's the one that wrote Frankenstein. Yes? No.
Yeah.
The book Frankenstein. So that's kind of interesting. This is a fun tool, by the way. I've seen a lot of authors are using it when they're like, you know, writing about something. So this started around this time, because you can find it, because this is like all the books. Remember Google had this project of putting all the books on digital, and you could search them, right? And so there they are. Of course, as you get up closer to contemporary times, within the last 75 years, depending on whether they've extended their copyright privilege or not, the book would not necessarily be part of what you're looking at. So if we're looking up the meaning of the word good, it really is totally dependent on the context. That's the way we would say it today. Didn't used to be that way. It used to be that they thought that the word actually had a meaning. And school was to teach you what those meanings were. So, for example, C.S. Lewis, in his book, Words, Studies in Word, wrote this book. Remember, he was a scholar, a classics scholar, as well as a author of children's stories, right? And he was very concerned because Wittgenstein had had an impact on education in England by arguing his philosophy of language, that language is dynamic and evolving, and that words' meanings literally change over time. And C.S. Lewis was horrified, because that's absolutely false. The whole point of getting an education is so that you learn the correct meanings of the words. That's what makes you educated. You know what they mean. You know the right meaning. so that you're not going to misuse words, right? Hence his book, because he was furious. The main target was a particular school book that encouraged kids to think that the words' meanings were dynamic and changed according to context, which is totally wrong as far as he's concerned. By the way, I hate to say it, but if you love C.S. Lewis, I'm sorry, C.S. Lewis lost that battle. And now today, everyone just accepts the idea that words are dynamic and that what was cool years ago is now hot, and what was hot is now neato, and neato is spiffy keen and wicked, and then, right, you get the idea. It's just funny. That's the way it works for us today. But when we're looking back here, they haven't discovered that words have meanings yet. They still think that ideas are like real things somehow in the organization of the universe. And then Aristotle comes along and says, no, that's not how that works. Every art and every inquiry, and similarly every action and pursuit is thought. So these are all contexts. These are all different contexts. They're all thought to aim at some good. But, as he explains, the context of each of these things ends up demanding that the word good means different things in all of them. So it can't be the case that there is one kind of good at the top of the peak, right, that causes everything else. Right? So, and boy, that is significant, right? Because remember, for Plato, the good is like the source of everything. So you could always just take out one O, right? And you get, what's the difference? The good or God, right? For Plato, it's pretty close. Identical, actually, right? And also where we get the Christian source of thinking that God is all good, right? That's not a Hebraic or Israel kind of concept. Remember, God was a pain in the to those people, right? He didn't like you, he was going to kill you. And your wife came to the rescue by saying, we'll cut off their foreskin and then you'll be okay. And just, I like that, okay. Sorry if I'm kind of mistreating interesting book, But yeah, God comes across as an anthropos, a person, right? And he's an individual that has a temper, mean. You can't quite figure out what he really wants. Moses, look at me. Why did you melt my face? Sorry, shouldn't have done that. Avert your face next time. Okay, well, I don't have any face left. You burned it off the first time. Sorry, I shouldn't be a comic when I'm talking about such seriously. But here we go. For Plato, God is good, and everything comes from that peak. And in fact, if we remember agape, we were talking about the four loves. Agape is where all that love comes from, right? So that all the others, eros, storge, and philia, all, in some sense, are deriving their goodness from agape, which then clearly from God. But pizza, eyes. Pizza is good. Some pizza is better than other pizza. So you can have pizza with your favorite toppings. And by the way, I bet your favorite toppings are not the same as like your favorite toppings. In fact, it could be a problem if your favorite toppings are not the same as yours. Then you have to buy 2 pizzas, right? You get what you want, and I'll get what I want. I have a family, I know exactly how that works, right? And frankly, I never get what I want. So you always have to get what everybody else wants, and I just, eat whatever, right? You know how that works, right? So,
No, I order personal and whatever I want.
so how many kinds of good pizza are there? I mean, and do they all come from some kind of special? No, they don't. There's too much of a variety of it. Plus, I'm puzzled just as I hope you go to Italy and they don't have it. What? There's an Italian food. No, they don't have that there. That's an American thing. It is, actually. You can't get American pizza in Italy. It's like totally weird. However, but so is there something that makes pizza pizza? No, there isn't. There's lots of different kinds of pizza. And some, so like, if someone says, pizza rolls, those are not pizza. What makes you think they're pizza rolls? Why are they pizza rolls? They just felt like calling it that, right? Right? Right. So you can, you can invent words. Charles Dickens invents words. William Shakespeare invented all kinds of words. Sarah Palin invents words.
Yeah.
And, I'm go fifi with that. So how do you spell it?
It was F-E, I believe.
F-E? F?
F-E, yeah.
Yeah, there it is, so sorry about that.
F-E.
Kafif. I'm kafif with inventing your own new words. In fact, I think I've invented some of my own new words, although I'm very proud of, when the kids were little, and we learned that when you send them to school, they meet other kids, they come home with words that you did not intend them to learn at school, right? And I remember my one daughter come home, little girl, she looks up at me and she says, "Daddy, what does fuck mean?" And you don't, when I was a kid, had I asked that question, whap would have happened, right? That kind of thing. And I would have been left on my own to discover, gee, there's something wrong with that word, you're not supposed to use it. But I was impressed. My little daughter has a close enough relationship with her dad that she can ask me that kind of question. And so I could explain to her, it's a power word. You use it in order to accomplish things, but it's not really a good power word. You should use a different power word instead, that kind of thing. So we try to invent each their own power word. They could create their own power word. So whenever you slam your thumb with a hammer or something, instead of yelling something like that, you could yell something like "argle," which is my word. Argle fargle. If I'm really upset, I can use both. And I thought I invented that totally. Turns out it's a castle in Scotland. So, and socks. You can have fargle, argyle socks, actually, not fargle socks. Argle socks.
My mother would use a
It's
whole
like with a
sentence.
hatch,
Argyle.
Argyle socks. But yes, you can make up your own words. What about individuals that make up their own words totally and think that they're speaking a foreign language that they're getting from God?
Pentecostals, is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Speaking in tongues.
I've never seen this before.
This
So.
is going to be a demonstration of my glossolalia. My eyes look even baggier than usual because A, the light's shining from underneath, and B, I was crying a minute ago, so my eyes actually are really this really eerie environment. I'm in my tent. Jag valde för mig snart utan everything there is far. Where none caritinia there is in the but I pushed them. Okay, now. Det är väl sen att det är och jag pushed.
You familiar with this practice?
Mhm.
Yes? How does it work?
Biblically, it's not legit unless somebody can interpret what you're saying.
But are they actually succeeding in interpreting what you're saying?
I don't know. That's
Or are they
the
just
theory
making up
behind
something?
it, is that one person is being spoken to by God, and then somebody else is like, I know what they meant, and then, oh, your story checks out.
Seems legit.
I don't know. It seems obvious that you have to have a community or a society of speakers who speak the same language. This is referred to as the private language argument. And the conclusion we have today is that there is no such thing as a private language. It has to be so this goes right back to Wittgenstein as well, and the argument that yes, it's dependent on context, but no, you can't have no non-contextual meaning. So you have to have a group of speakers that all know what you're talking about. But yes, you can create your own new words. Did I ask you if you can create grammar?
Mm-hmm.
I asked that last class, right? Did I ask that?
You asked it as a quiz question,
Yeah.
a couple classes ago maybe.
Yeah. What were your responses? I don't remember any of them.
I said
About
no,
that.
like, that you could maybe discover new functions, but, or like, discover new pieces, dissect it one step further, but that it's still always there. And so you're not creating a new, you're just recognizing it.
Yeah, I don't, obviously there has to be some kind of evolution in grammar, because if English is a Germanic language, but obviously our grammar is not the same. In some senses it is, but we don't. But actually, we have the same parts of speech. We have nouns, we have verbs, we have adjectives, we have adverbs, we have noun clauses, predicate clauses, we have gerunds, infinitives. I think you could go through any of the Western European languages and find the same thing. Hopeless case when it comes to trying to analyze whether Asian languages have the same kinds of things or not. My guess is that they don't. But
I don't speak it, but it sure is funny when you watch the old martial arts movies and they dub in English and their lips are still moving after nothing.
well, I was thinking of this one here.
Of course, it matters on society that's speaking that language. If that society disappears, their language disappears along with the grammar. That's
For relaxing times,
the language.
make it
evolves
Centauri
with
time.
necessary.
カットカットカットカット
Have you seen this movie?
時間がないんだよ、ね、パッションがカメラのテンション上げて with intensity
Is that everything? It seemed like he said more than that.
Mr. Harris よう見たなボブ
You're a movie star.
Yes, I should be doing, yeah.
You know Rat Pack? Rat Pack? A ring a ding ding.
Mr. Harris, Mr. Kazuo said my stockings. Lip them.
What?
Hey, lip my stocking.
Lip them? What? What are you doing?
My husband's a photographer, so he's here working. I wasn't doing anything, so I came along.
What do you do?
Just hilarious. And the scene where it seemed like he said more than that, and she said with enthusiasm, I think, right? But he had basically given him like a 5-minute harangue about what he wanted, right? And then the translator looked at him and said, with enthusiasm. That was all the directions he got. You know? So your comment about how in the old movies that the translation just doesn't go with, you know.
Well, she was being political. She left out all the cuss words and everything else in the other language.
Maybe I don't know. There was also Never Cry Wolf. Did you see that movie?
Yeah.
And that's where the National Geographic photographer is up on the tundra
Yeah.
studying wolves, and one of the things he's discovered is that they don't have game, so what the heck are these wolves eating? And he watches them, with his binoculars, and what he notices is they're hunting little rodents all over the place. So they're basically living off of mice. And when he realizes that, he looks around his tent, and he's just got mice everywhere in his tent, right? And he just thinks a minute, and then the next scene, he's sitting there eating a sandwich with little mice tails sticking out of it, and he's writing in his log that he's testing to see if a mammal his size could live off of mice. And meanwhile, an elder comes by with the young Eskimo who's his translator, and they ask, "What are you eating?" And he explains he's eating mice. And the elder goes, "Oh, whatever, I don't speak Eskimo, And the young son then translates and he says that's interesting." So that's cool. So when we get to the invention, really, of meaning and recognizing that the word good can't just mean one thing that we can't quite reach because it's beyond us somehow, because we're still in a body and our bodies keep us grounded in corruption, so we can't know the truth. Instead, the truth becomes relative to context, relative to situation, relative to speakers, relative to those that are basically trying to interpret what meanings they're passing on to one another. And so we end up with lots and lots of these different kinds of good. Next, should we stop for a minute? Take a break? Has this been running? Yes?